Good morning, everyone, and thank you for connecting to our webcast today. Today is about our Parallels Remote Application Server version 15.5 Update 2. Update 2 came or became available last week and addressing a few great features of our Parallels Remote Application Server. So the agenda today is related to talk about our new RAS API that leverages PowerShell. What's new in our HTML5 client, support for VMware vSphere. So if you're using vSphere 6.5, now we support VDI use cases. And we have made significant improvements in the session management and as well remote application server now available on Azure. Azure was launched initially last year, but now we are promoting more and more this particular use case. If you have any questions during the webcast today, I would like to remind you that you can use the chat window to post your questions, and we can address as in the end of the presentation today. So let's get started. So first of all, just a quick recap about Remote Application Server. As we all know, we are a technology that delivers any Windows applications or even desktops or remote PCs, either using Microsoft Remote Desktop Services, RDSH, and VDI running on all major hypervisors. So when we talk about hypervisors, we work today on KVM base for application publishing, and for VDI and application publishing, we are on Zen Server, we are on VMware, and as well on Microsoft Hyper-V. All of those applications can be delivered in multiple clients and devices, iOS, Android, Mac, PCs, Chromebooks, Linux devices, Raspberry Pis, and as well to some degree in Windows IoT devices. Applications are not installed on the local client or on the local computer, and as well the entire processing is done on the server side. So when we talk about Remote Application Server, we have made significant improvements in version 15.5, as I mentioned back in November, on the scalability side, on the experience side, on printing. But in the session today, which leverages features that are very, very useful for private cloud customers and as well to service providers, we added a few features related to delivery, or if you will, end user experience, and as well features that will help administrators to easier use Remote Application Server and as well integrate with their backend infrastructure or automation tools. So if you use automation tools to deploy VMs today, either for VDI or for Remote Application Server roles like a terminal server or publishing agent or even the gateway, now we allow you to automate that process and behind the scenes provision those features without using the console. So let's talk about the PowerShell API that we have introduced in this new version. So first of all, the API documentation is now available in our resources page, where you can either use the download version of the manual as well use an HTML version. We can see that getting started, the requirements on the server side, as well the admin module, and we provide you examples that includes command extensions and examples on how that works. So it's not empty or nothing that you would not be able to do it on your own. And if you have questions when you use the PowerShell, you can either engage Parallels pre-sales team and as well our support group. In a nutshell, the ability to use PowerShell, it is very useful if you already use other products like SCCM, or if you're using Azure or even AWS, where you can combine your existing deployment rules and include Parallels Remote Application Server. What kind of use cases we serve here? Like RAS installation, it could be RAS licensing or licensing activation, and as well configurations related to deploying roles like the PA, the gateways, the terminal servers, publishing applications or desktops. So scripting can be very useful if you do very repetitive tasks in terms of cloning and deploying, and as well changing application and configurations. So one good example, in fact I have two of them. One of them is how we can query like RAS roles using PowerShell. So first of all, you can use this command to do the import psadmin, which, by the way, once you install RAS 15.5 Update 2, the PowerShell module is installed by default. Then you can set your connection strings, like the user here is Matt with the password 123. So once the connection is established, by the way, can be done from your computer to where the PA or the PAs are installed. You can query all of the components or items that have been published. So in this case, using the get pub item, I can see what applications or features are deployed. I can see calculator, Word, Excel. We have a training desktop and as well a folder. If I want to get, for example, only the published RDS desktops, we can use a different get command. So if you're familiarized with PowerShell, we use the same type of structure using the get commands in order to query the API and get the information that you need. And as well, if you're just looking to get only the published RDS applications, you can just do get pub DS app, and then here we can see the list. If you have changes, that's what it shows as a parent ID in previous IDs. It shows if they have moved around or changed over time. So it's more like a track of knowledge of what have changed in the configuration side. Now, if I have my RAS already installed and I want to push a RDS role to be added to a terminal server, which includes two pieces, our agent and deploying the firewall rules, and as well the RDS components, you can do this. You establish the connection to your RAS server, in this case is the PA. We will get the RDS machines that you already have. Then we can add a new server. So when you use the new RDS and you put either a host name or IP address, we'll be pushing the installer, executing the command, making sure the role is installed properly. If you have done this before, you will see this particular dialog is very, very familiar. It is the same dialog that shows when you use the graphic UI, but in this case, we're just using a command to do that. Once that it's completed, we can apply the configurations. This is what the apply button is, in this case, happening here throughout the API. So you add, you configure, and now it's ready to be propagated throughout the PAs and make sure it's in quotes production mode. You use the invoke apply command. And when you do another get RDS, like I did in the beginning, now we will see that this new terminal server is enabled, it's configured, and it's up and running. So that's simple. So of course, if you prefer to use the PowerShell interface. In the HTML5 client improvements, there are a few things that we have added, and I wanted to highlight this feature because this comes across in many conversations we have with customers. Now, the HTML5 web-based access, it works for applications, for desktops, or published desktops, VDI, and as well for remote PCs. What we have changed in Update 2, HTML5 now is available on the mobile client as well. So if you have a lockdown iOS or Android devices and you cannot install the client, now you can use RAS like you had in the PC HTML5 client, the same experience on the iPad and iOS. Of course, if you want to leverage the magnifier, specific gestures, in this case it is recommended to still use the iOS client. However, from the HTML5 portal, you can download and install and configure the client. This is very important, and it's here on the right side of the screen. So the download button, you either go to the App Store or to the website, download it, and then when you click on the configure button, that will install the settings for you. What we also improved in the HTML5 client is you can download the client, but if you don't want to leave any configuration behind, the HTML5 client has the capability to build dynamically the string of the application or desktop and make the connection for you. And I would like to demonstrate that to you today because it's a very cool feature where it reduces the complexity and includes potential confusion from the end user side. Now we also combine the taskbar items when multiple applications are open. So let's say you have 2 instances of Microsoft Excel or 2 instances of Microsoft Word. In the past, they would be side by side in the taskbar, and now they have been combined like what we have today in the HTML5 client. And from a performance and scalability perspective, we have enhanced and added additional support for SSL offload on the hub. Hub is our high availability load balancer. If you're using our load balancer today, now we are doing SSL offload and distribution of traffic throughout the gateways automatically. That was a big feature that people requested in version 15. We implemented in 15.5 and we enhanced in 15.5 update 2. More performance components were added in the HTML5 in the background side. Now we also support improved video streaming and audio playback. So if you're watching videos or listening audio and so on, that have been improved significantly in the performance. That was a big question and comment that came from proof of concepts and implementations, that HTML5 was okay, but it was a little bit slow. We're now also supporting new remote FX capabilities, which includes adaptive acceleration. So that's why it is faster when you use now the HTML5 client. And we have an easier transition when you are in the HTML5 portal, like we have in the PC, now to iOS and Android clients. So like on the right side of the screen, once you use the HTML5 client on mobile devices, we do endpoint discovery, and if we detect the client, we can either use the client launcher, if you will, or configure the settings like I mentioned before. So this is a very important item that was introduced in this latest release. If you still have version 15.5, update 1, or even version 15, it will tell you the HTML5 client is not compatible to mobile devices. So that's the big change from an experience perspective in update 2, allowing now that feature. In the backend side, support to VMware vSphere ESXi 6.5. It was one of the big highlights in this particular version. So VM cloning, templating, and real-time provisioning for VDI is now supported into VMware ESXi 6.5. So if you're familiar with our hypervisor settings, what have been changed basically was the introduction and the API updating the backend on how you're interacting with the VDI version. However, from an end user perspective, there was no change. So you can use the same agent settings, the same type of capability to be enabled. However, you don't have to use the option is called Other, which it's not supported specific features in 6.5. So we decided to include additional updated optimizations for ESXi 6.5. On the session management side, this was an improvement that came across from administrators to have better visibility of what's going on or what users are doing in real time in remote application server. So if you're in version 15 or 15.5 update 1, you can see the sessions, but we don't have the capability to see what color depth they have, the device name, the login time, idle time, and in the username settings now, we can see all of the processes the user are running. And of course, features like queue process, go to publish item is to see the link between, okay, the user is using Microsoft Word, but with publishing application you did or desktop, now that information is available throughout the console. On the command side, we added disconnect, send message, and log off for all sessions and all server versions in the backend. So if you're using Windows Server 2016, Windows Server 2012, and 12 R2, or even 2008 and 2008 R2, now it's a seamless way that we can send the disconnect, send message, and log off. So it's much more efficient and reliable. In Azure, not sure if you have seen our webcast about our announcement on Microsoft Azure Marketplace. Remote application server is now available at Azure Marketplace. You can use the latest version there and as well run proof of concepts. In fact, we have a few customers nowadays either using full Azure deployment and a few using what we call hybrid mode deployment, where they have remote application server running on their main data center on-premise, if you will, and extended server configurations like a backup PA, load balancer, gateways, and terminal servers, and remote PCs, which it will depend on what kind of enterprise agreement you have with Microsoft, running on Azure. So the only use case today not available from a Parallels remote application server on Azure, it is VDI use cases. However, if you're looking to have a cheaper disaster recovery and as well load balance throughout a large cloud provider, we simplify how you can start the deployment on Azure. And how it works. So we have what we call RAS offering call all-in-one, which comes with a publishing agent. It comes with the PA, gateways, and RDS pre-configured. Pricing covers only Azure infrastructure and Windows Server license. So you can bring your own RDCal and RAS licenses through Parallels My Account. So like what you have today with Parallels My Account to consume the licenses. The estimated price, unfortunately, it will vary because each Azure data center might have different pricing and as well how much bandwidth you might be adding. So we have made projection prices to be running on Azure based upon specific scenarios and use cases. So if you start using Azure, this is just a projection for users using 50 gigabytes of local storage. You buy from Microsoft RDCals and you use Azure infrastructure. We can give you an estimated cost, how much is going to be per user. So more users you have, cheaper it gets in a per user base a year. So if you're an enterprise or a business or service provider, let's say 100 users, for example, the cost to run remote application server per year per user, it is around $243 a year, which is very, very competitive if you compare with other solutions in the marketplace where the price range might be double or even more than that. We know for a fact that we're 60% cheaper and we're working aggressively with Microsoft and our partners to promote Azure infrastructure if you feel more comfortable using the cloud. So I recommend, if you haven't tried, you can use it for 30 days. There's no cost either from Parallels or even Azure to run our software on the cloud. And how the process works, it's actually much simpler than what used to be. So you go to the marketplace, we configure the offering, for example, using our D2 V2 VM settings, which is the default. We will size and provision the VM behind the scenes. You can activate a trial key and start using RAS. This particular time frame, it takes more or less 15 minutes or less. It depends how much or how fast the Azure provisioning system will be allowing you to have the VM provisioned. With that in mind, this is the first part of my big agenda, I would say, the presentation, and let me shift to the demo very quickly. So here on the HTML5 side, so let me just make this screen a little bit bigger, and I have already logged into my Parallels Remote Application Server environment. So when we do the login for the first time, we detect what version of the client you have. But the two big things here is we introduced the download feature for you to do the client, where you can download it. So in the Mac, it will go to the App Store from Apple, iPad to the iTunes, Android to the Google Play. On a Windows device, it will go to Parallels website. The configure button, which is fairly new, will add the configuration. So let me show you two things. So let me just go back to my desktop and let me open my Parallels client. There are no connections here. So if I close my client and go back to the browser and I click on the configure button, and now I go back to my client, it have added all of the settings for me automatically. I don't need to know if I'm using gateway mode, if I'm using SSL mode. All of this information came automatically for me. Of course, I can just type my username and then log in like I have on my client. So this is, now doing the client access for me. If I remove this particular connection, so just simply delete it and go back to the HTML5 client, close this window, and let's say I want to open the RAS console. I can right-click and choose between using the Parallels client and or the HTML5 client. So let's use the full client experience for now. We're connecting to the site. We're opening a session like a typical RAS connection, which is loading my profile now. And then we can play around with the new settings on the server side. So just taking a moment here. There we go. So here's the client loaded for us. Now, what is very important here, when you're using the application loaded, I have no settings on the server side. Now, what is very important here in the new features, what I was highlighting, which is very visible here in the administration side, it's the new session manager. Now I can see which server my connections are touching. So I have two different users connected, what protocol is being used, idle, logon time, for how long the session has been opened. And we can see the resolution of my laptop connection, depth, the computer name, and the IP address of the remote network. So now it's easier to debug if you need to know a little bit more about the usage. If you right-click, you can do remote control, the disconnects and messages features, and showing running processes. What I mentioned about the applications is we see this number 15. This is an internal control that RAS creates for a session management perspective. But if I right-click, I can, of course, queue the process, but going to the publishing item, boom, we already connected and highlighted the session that we have for the user. So that is a very big point from a debugging perspective. Now, if I go back to my administration and go here for other informations like showing running processes, there are a few new features also introduced. Session ID, the local operating system process ID, and I'm selecting processes from the selected session. However, I can see from the selected server, I can see everything that it's running on RAS Demo 01 for all users. And as well, if I want to see for all of my servers. So right now, only RAS Demo 1 is served from a terminal server perspective. Leveraging what Microsoft is, it again goes back to what kind of contract you have and use Windows 10 on Azure, bring your own license. This is another feature that we have had in Remote Application Server, but we wanted to highlight it now because it's becoming more and more popular. Here in my farm, I can see that I have remote PCs. And those remote PCs, they are all published into our Azure farm. So that leads to the second part of the demo that I wanted to highlight. So if I switch my screen here for a second and go to my iPad, we can again open the browser. We can go to the demo environment. We can log in with the user. And here we do the detection. So I already have the client on, but I will pretend that I don't have it. So we will let the detection process to happen. And once it's done, I can open the app or even go to the client and show you the remote PC option. So open the Parallels HTML5 client. So I will tap here on the link. Let's say I'm coming here to my admin tools. I can zoom like, the iPad feature. And if I tap, for example, on the WordPad or control panel, I can see the control panel like an app. Like I mentioned before, the control bar appears here for all of the apps that I have. I can minimize. Let's say I want to open a WordPad, document 1. I will open a second WordPad document. Where are all of my WordPad documents? They appear here on the bottom. If I don't need it anymore, I can just click and close. The same thing over here. Now, this is a new feature added into the HTML5 client. So let me switch very quickly to the full client. And here we're connecting as well to RAS on Azure, seeing the same applications that I have. And if I click on Remote Desktops, I will connect to Remote PC Victor. This is not a published RDSH desktop. It is a full Windows 10 virtual machine. You can run on your data center if you have the proper licenses, but in this case, in Azure, I brought my own license and I'm running my app from there. So I can go here to the Start menu. I can say I will open Excel. I can use Cortana or even leverage microphone features, which I'll show you in a second. I can open the client, open this complex, let's say, spreadsheet over here. So let me close it. And now we can do things that was very hard to do in the tablet. So if I tap, for example, in this pie chart, in the WebEx you see a lag, but in real time, I encourage you to try in your environment. You see it is in real time. So if I tap and hold with my finger, we're using very specific mouse precise features now here on the client. The magnifier detected that was a corner. Now I can make, for example, this particular pie chart bigger. If I say I want to change the color, and again using mouse capabilities, I can tap into, for example, the font. I can change the font and the color. So if I just tap and hold, I can say I want this particular type of blue, and then that will happen in real time. From a performance point of view, compression and touch capabilities and different gestures that are highly optimized for the mobile clients, we prefer you to use this particular iOS or Android client because we have all of these features in here. And as well, if you are starting to think in use cases where you want to use Skype for Business and in the iOS or Android, it doesn't work so great, you can start using microphone and speaker redirection using this particular client. In this case, we highly recommend you to use the latest version of Remote FX on the server side to make sure compression, and performance, it's adequate and very useful and meaningful for the end users. So those are the things that I wanted to highlight in the demo today. So let me just switch back here to my presentation and I'll stop sharing the screen. And if you have any questions, I would like to open them up for the audience. So please feel free to add your questions into the chat window.